My name is Patrícia García de Mendoza, and I'm going to present the Northern Ireland peace process. The Northern Ireland peace process raised as a necessity to the conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics of Northern Ireland. This conflict was called the Troubles and lasted from 1968 to 1999. This dispute began in 1921, when Ireland was divided by the British government. A great part of Ireland became an independent state, whereas the northeastern part of the island continued to be part of the United Kingdom. This represented the confrontation between various political, cultural, and religious identities. There were two sides of the conflicts. First, the Protestants, or also called Unionists, which were 48% of the population, and they described themselves as British. On the other side, we had the Catholics, or also called Nationalists, that were 45% of the population, and they described themselves as Irish. Being inspired by the civil rights movement in the United States, a civil rights initiative started at the beginning of the 1960 decade to end discrimination against Catholic community. After this being created, several riots started taking place. So, after that, there was a three-part conflict. The first part was the British Army and the Royal Ulster Constabulary, which represented the state forces. Then we had the Irish Republican Army and the Irish National Liberation Army, which represented the nationalist side. Finally, we had the Ulster Volunteer Force and the Ulster Defence Association, which represented the Unionist Party. Later, in 1994, paramilitary groups announced ceasefires. In this sense, it would be interesting to comment on the parties and the interest that took place on the negotiation. First, we have Northern Ireland. Here, it is necessary to differentiate between the two parties. As I said before, there were the Catholics, which were represented by the Sinn Féin party. In this party, there was Gerry Adams, which was the leader, and Martin McGuinness, which was the chief negotiator. In the Protestant side, there was the Ulster Unionist Party, which was represented by David Trimble. Another key figure in the Northern Ireland side was John Hume, who was the guiding force behind many major peace efforts during the 30 years previous to the peace agreements. Then we had Peter Mandelson, who assumed the role of the Northern Ireland Secretary in 1999. After that, he resigned, and John Reid became the Secretary of Northern Ireland the last month of the peace process. The last important figure of the Northern Ireland was Mo Mowlam, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Then we have the second block, which is United Kingdom. United Kingdom was represented by Tony Blair, who became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in 1997 during the process of the peace talks. Then we also have Jeffrey Donaldson, member of the Parliament representing the Ulster Unionist Party. Then we also have John Major, Prime Minister of the sovereign country until 1997. Another bloc was the Ireland bloc, which was represented by Bertie Ahern, which was the Taoiseach, or also called the Prime Minister of Ireland, and Albert Reynolds, who was the Taoiseach during a 2-year period, from 1992 to 1994. Albert Reynolds, conjointly with John Major, started to make the first steps for the peace process and delivered the Downing Street Declaration, which acknowledged all the people of Northern Ireland's case for self-determination. The final bloc in the negotiations was the United States bloc, which was represented by Bill Clinton, the first president of the United States to visit Northern Ireland, and Senator George Mitchell, which was sent by President Clinton as an envoy. Mitchell acted as an arbitrator in the conflict. So, the negotiation process. It took 700 days to negotiate leading up to a deal, with over a year spent only drafting procedures and defining the agenda. As I mentioned, U.S. Senator George Mitchell played a crucial role, and he used the Mitchell Principles, which were preconditions for talks, including a pledge to nonviolence, open communication, and democracy. Then a decisive turn in peace negotiations was when members of an Irish Republican Party murdered Bill Wright, which was the head of a unionist group that was firmly opposed to the peace process. That being said, I would like to comment a little bit on the techniques used by George Michael. He commented on an interview that in business negotiation, he recommends always knowing your topic first. He also said that being familiar with the participants and the problems is crucial. Mitchell also commented on the necessity of describing the priorities clearly, because if not, negotiators will spend a long time on important issues. Mitchell also identified success and understood that success does not mean 100% success always. He also said that engaging both parties at the bargaining table is really important. Interestingly, Roger Fisher and William Ury, which are the authors of the Getting to Yes book, shared some perspectives with George Michael. They said that the most significant abilities a negotiator may develop are the skill to see a situation as the other side sees it. Also, they commented that offering the contrary parties taking the result is really important because you ensure that they take roles in the decision. So, the peace accord. The peace accord that were reached in this conflict was the Belfast Agreement, also called the Good Friday Agreement. It was signed in 1988 and established a basis for political resolution in Northern Ireland with an emphasis on the sharing of power between Unionists and Nationalists. This agreement specified that as long as that was the wish of the people living there, Northern Ireland should remain within the UK. But if, in the contrary, their wish was to become of the people of the province, the British and the Irish government should give effect to arrangements for a united Ireland. In the pictures, we can see the British Prime Minister Tony Blair on the left and then the Irish Prime Minister Bertie Ahern on the right, signing the agreement. Then, challenges after the peace accords. After 1998, the situation improved. However, it has been difficult to completely enforce the peace agreement because over the years, police reforms have been main sticking points that have created uncertainty in the government. In this sense, tensions and mistrust between the Unionist and Nationalist parties have arisen, tensions that everyone knows, and that the peace accords could not do anything about it. Then another important challenge in this situation is the Brexit. In January 2020, Brexit took place and could have had huge economic and political effects on Northern Ireland. Brexit has provoked a series of constitutional problems to the United Kingdom. And it is important to note that of the different parts of the United Kingdom, Scotland, for example, voted to stay in the EU by 62%, Northern Ireland voted by 56%, and Gibraltar by 96%. So, in this context, the Unionists who hold the UK government in power misinterpret the Northern Irish electorate's wishes. Finally, another challenge important to mention is that nowadays in Northern Ireland, the quest for peace and reconciliation, reducing sectary differences, coping with the past, or resolving ongoing concerns regarding paramilitary dissidents is really important, and it has to be taken into account because if not, tensions could become worse. Another important topic that I wanted to comment were the dilemmas that arise from the negotiation. Basically, the three dilemmas that I have put here are ethical dilemmas. The first one is that through commissions generally investigate government misconduct, but in the case of Northern Ireland, around 87% of the fatalities were perpetrated by paramilitaries. So in this sense, we should think that these deaths cannot be adequately examined because they have already been completely amnestied. This is an ethical dilemma that we should think about in cases similar to the Northern Ireland case. Another dilemma is, as I posted here, a quote by Dr. David Stevens: political life has to keep going and not to be paralyzed by past wrongdoing. This means because politicians are often criticized for actions that they have made in the past, but this impedes progress, and we shouldn't criticize them. We should leave the past behind. And finally, another important ethical dilemma that arises in this case is represented in the slide with another quote by Professor Simon Lee. It says, "How far does state security override legal and moral rules in the interest of defeating deadly enemies such as the provisional IRA?" In this sense, states must have a line which they should not cross in any situation, even if there is a terrorist group at stake, because In my opinion, terrorist organizations are unorganized, they do not have a clear hierarchical structure, and states must be aware of this situation and this characteristic, because if not, it causes a persistent threat to the functioning of the state, of the central government, etc. Lessons learned from the Northern Ireland peace process. This peace process indeed has taught many lessons to all of us. And for instance, one of them is that aggression will never be the answer. Another one is that terrorists will not lay down their arms unless they see a realistic diplomatic solution through dialogues and negotiation. Another one should be that the importance of having an arbitrator, which in this case was US Senator George Mitchell, which did a great job. And finally, the fourth lesson learned here would be that compromising is necessary. In the words of Prime Minister Bertie Ahern, the art of politics is compromise. You can't make progress without compromise. Because compromise is when people come together and say, listen, this is the dilemma, this is the difficulty, this is what is unsaleable to my people, and let us try and find a way out. Then, I have reunited here the initiatives and institutions that have been created after the peace accords to preserve the peace. The first one was created in 2006. It's the St. Andrews Agreement, which laid out a roadmap to complete police and justice revolution. Then we have the Hillsborough Agreement, which was signed in 2010 and enabled the devolution of policing and justice powers. Then we have in 2013 the Haas Initiative, which was formulated by US former diplomat Richard Haas, and it had several recommendations that served to deal sectarian issues, riots, or the use of flags in the different parts of Northern Ireland. Then we have in 2014 the Stormont House Agreement. This agreement was made and the Northern Ireland political parties agreed to support welfare reform. Finally, the 2015 Fresh Start Agreement that focused on implementing welfare reform and improving the stability and sustainability of Northern Ireland's budget and governing institutions. And finally, institutions made after the peace process were the Northern Ireland Assembly, the North-South Ministerial Council, and the British-Irish Council. Very important to remark that there has been progress in this sense. Finally, conclusions. I think that even though the Troubles started as a violent era, we can see that negotiations have been crucial in this sense. I would like to conclude these presentations by putting 3 quotes here. The first one is a quote by President Bill Clinton, which was an important key figure in these negotiations. The quote says, "The Good Friday Agreement is a work of genius that's applicable if you care at all about preserving democracy. It calls for real democracy, majority rule, minority rights, individual rights, the rule of law, the end of violence, shared political decision-making, shared economic benefits. This deal maintained the relationship with the United Kingdom, expanded the relationship with the Irish Republic, and then let the future take its course." In this sense, Bill Clinton is saying that this agreement was, of course, very successful. Another quote that I would like to remark to conclude this presentation is this by the author German. It says, "Northern Ireland remains a highly segregated society, with contrasting and competing collective identities and with little in the way of shared symbols, shared history, or a shared vision for the future." A quote that clearly describes this peace process. And finally, the last quote by the same author says, "The Northern Ireland transition has highlighted the importance and value of a very broad inclusive process and the need for a long-term perspective for successful peace building." Yes, I think these 3 quotes basically summarize all of this Northern Ireland peace process. So that is my presentation. Thank you.